What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with yet another album review, and today I am talking about the latest offering from Sadist, Something to Pierce. This also comes out on March 7th on Agonia Records, and this is the band's 10th studio full-length overall. I actually talked about their last album back in 2022 on an episode of Under the Radar and liked what I heard, so I wanted to go over this new one. So for those who don't know, Sadist is an Italian progressive death metal band with hints of technical death metal as well. And yeah, it's just a bonkers style of progressive death metal where the songs aren't like mega long. They transition quite a lot within the songs, but there's a lot of cool moments that go on in this band, at least from what I've heard thus far with the recent output. But we kick things off on this album with the title track, and immediately it starts off very similar to the band Death. It's like classic thrashy death metal. There's also some really cool drum grooves and riffs that are popping up here and there on the song. It gallops very nicely. There's even some like really cool like dark sinister melodies that show up, as well as your blast beats. But I gotta admit, there's a moment on here where the song starts to get a little bit lush with the melodies and even a really cool solo, like a more tuneful, soulful guitar solo, before you get into these like spooky synths and some really cool bass melodies before you end off with more evil melodies. It's just, for a song that I think was a little under 4 minutes, or maybe a little over 4 minutes, I can't quite remember, but it's a short song for a progressive death metal track, and they managed to fit a bunch of ideas into this short format, and still kind of came out pretty damn solid. Now, as far as how the rest of the album goes, like the flow of the album is pretty solid flow throughout, as well as with trying to keep like everything in a cohesive manner. I do admit, like, there are some really sharp transitions, or they'll just go from one riff for a couple bars to another riff for a couple bars and rinse and repeat. Like, not a whole lot of like repeating parts, but when they do repeat, it is something to behold. As far as like what you're typically getting on here musically, it's like you are getting some like classic early 90s technical death metal throughout a lot of this album. I'm talking about, Death, I would say even a little bit of Nocturnus, Cynic, Atheist, Pestilence, like that early 90s technical death metal style coming up in this album, and really within the band as a whole. But what makes Sadist stand out is some of these more progressive moments, whether it be like getting into a guitar solo that kind of has that more lush melody, or gets very lavish, or they like to experiment with a lot of different flavors. Like, take for example the following track, Deprived. You get these like spooky synths on top before you get into like grooves and melodies and more angular riffing, and dare I say, it gets really quirky, and it almost reminds me more of Between the Buried and Me than anything else. Tribal groove is a thing that gets peppered in on quite a few songs like Deprived. Also, Dume Kike, I think that's how you say it, and Nov Strade. You get some like tribal percussion, which I'm a big sucker for tribal percussion on any song, because it just adds more dynamic and more diversity to the rhythm section. Now, as far as like the classic tropes, like tracks like No Feast for Flies, I would also say One Shot Closer, like those two songs in particular definitely showcase more of like that, again, that early 90s tech death vibe of Death and all the bands that I've talked about before. But with No Feast for Flies, this one, it maintains more of that like thrashy side, but you do get like tremolos and blast beats, even a wonderfully done acoustic and bass melody before it gets into a more progressive solo. Kill, Devour, Dissect, this one kind of goes for a lot of different things. Like, it starts off with these big chants, you get blast, technical riffs, and thrashy energy, almost like Obscura more than anything else, and it gets rather theatrical and whimsical a little bit on the verses. some really cool harmonies with the guitars, even some female vocals show up, and then a lead with drum and bass just grooving along, and even a Morbid Angel chug, and it follows into the Sun God, where it starts off with this big, like, evil Morbid Angel riff before it goes back into, like, thrashy tech death with quirky riffs, lumbering grooves, again, more harmonies and acoustic melodies. Now, Dume Kike starts off rather kind of psychedelic, a little bit like I'm listening to a late 60s, early 70s psychedelic rock melody, as well as with the synths on top adding more to it. And it gets off time, which again brings out more of that prog flavor. Also, it's pretty thrashy. There's even a moment where it gets quiet with the tribal percussion and keyboards. One Shot Closer, again, it's like tech death and thrashy. It's got great bass flourishes, even some like organ samples on the keyboards, and it almost feels kind of like you're in a three-ring circus. The best part is the brain. Tribal percussion also shows up here to start, and then it gets into like more of those death complex riffs and drum grooves. And then this and Novstrade, both of these songs have some really cool Middle Eastern melodies, whether it be in the acoustic guitars or just the melodies heard faintly in the background, especially on Novstrade. Also, it's thrashy with like melodic crawling riffs, and I just love the drum work too. And then the closer, Respirium, it's an instrumental, and it's like a groovy instrumental with awesome melodies, and the synths that kind of carry the melodies throughout almost sounds like something you would hear in like a Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter movie. Like, it's very wizardy, like very, very fantastical. Production wise, it's pretty raw, it's pretty gritty, but the mix is well balanced. Like, you can hear the bass, you can hear everything stand out in a big way. I will say though, the major issue, well, it's not really a major issue, it's more like a minor grievance, is that because these songs, for the most part, in a progressive death metal format are so short, sometimes there are sections that just don't have enough room to breathe and to like just lay on a good riff for a little bit longer, like 2 more bars before you go into the next thing. Like, sometimes these transitions, because of how short the songs are, do get a little bit sharp and a little bit jagged. But overall, musicality-wise, everything, like the songs are very good. I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5. I thought this was some pretty damn strong progressive death metal from these Italian veterans who have been doing it since the early to mid-90s. So I would say if you are a fan of Death, Cynic, Atheist, Pestilence, Nocturnus, definitely check this out. But of course, those are just my opinions. What did you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. But until next time, keep your horns high and your dreams wet.